I think corporate events have a bad rap. In often cases, it's because the two words don't seem to actually match up, right? Events are typically things that we know in our personal lives to celebrate moments that are worth celebrating with people that are worth spending time with. So when we bring that into the corporate world, corporate events don't necessarily seem like they're relevant to us. But I think that's a problem of days gone by. And it's not something that should limit you in how your company finds access to market, engages stakeholders, and adds value to your bottom line. Here at StartWell, of course, we've hosted hundreds and hundreds of organizations over the 8 years that we've been in business on King Street West in Toronto, Canada. And we've hosted, of course, thousands of people here for those sessions. In all of these meetings and events, we've learned for the last 8 years how the best organizers understand that simplicity is everything and that hosting is paramount. In this series, I wanted to walk you through some lessons that we've learned from being flies on the wall, but also from ideating this campus of 20,000 square feet starting in 2017, and then progressively evolving it through successive renovations and upgrades to make it into Canada's destination meeting and event campus. We're seriously an awesome place to spend the day, and corporate teams are happier for having been here. We hear it every day, and you can see it in our Google reviews. So without further ado, let's get started. First off, I want to dispel this myth of the bad corporate event, why people think events are terrible. And let's just spell it out. Typically, the person who's going to be organizing a corporate event has been told to do it. It's not necessarily going to be their main gig. Very few companies actually have corporate events teams, and when they do, they're focused on the wrong things. Now let's reel it back a little bit and talk about that person, because it might be you who's been told by someone that you work with to do an event. Okay, well, sounds easy. Just go do an event. Hey, can you organize an event for about 100 people next Thursday? Yeah, sounds good. I'll call around. It sounds easy, but as soon as you start picking up that phone or typing in those search criteria into like Google and your LLMs, there's too much information to digest. This series hopefully will make things simpler. And in order to do so, we've got to talk about why you're planning an event. Most corporate events are actually planned reactively, which means that someone has an inspirational moment and says, we should do that, or we can do that, or why don't we do that? And then the whole team scrambles to try and make it happen. Well, if you're reactive about how you're planning an event because you're fearful of missing out of an opportunity, for example, Black Friday or something, whatever the impetus is that has got you thinking that, hey, I don't want to miss out on an opportunity to reach people, so we've got to do an event, or we've got to do an event to capture it, to then send the video out. I think that's the wrong way to think about things. Instead, if you're proactive and you're looking ahead with the confidence of understanding all the logistical concerns to do with event planning, it can be pretty easy. And that's my goal, is to try and prepare you to be able to more easily think about events as something that are, that any company can use and that your company can actually have fun and create value through. So the lesson is move away from a reactive mindset as the justification for hosting an event into a proactive mindset where you're actually excited about hosting, so that you can be prepared to understand who you're going to host, how you're going to host them, and what the outputs are from the experience that you want to craft. So that's the transition from reactive to proactive. Now, let's talk about how you solve the problem of logistics. So the single vendor approach is what I would call your solution. It's a very difficult thing to find in most cities. However, StartWell exists as that. It's taken 8 years for us to build this solution out. So here in Toronto, if you're planning an event, I would definitely suggest to just come over because it's easy here. And I'll explain a little bit about what we do so that you can look for it elsewhere in the world or otherwise build it out if you're hosting a lot of internal events and your corporate campus is large and your budgets are extensive enough to be able to build it for whatever you want to host in the future. So to start with, We've got a physical space platform that merges hospitality with AV and space. Okay. These things come together really well because we've catered for all different types of corporate events. And we're going to break down the different formats in a second. But suffice it to know, the single vendor approach will make your life easier because you don't want to have to deal with furnishing, the actual raw space that you've rented, catering, bar service, AV equipment, AV and stage management and staffing, media recording, media post production, media publishing, and everything else that could be on the list of a multi vendor conventional event production. In fact, when you go through that list, most people actually get pretty freaked out. And it is a scary proposition. Imagine you're being tasked with producing an event every quarter that's just 4 events a year for 100 people, and you have to create that vendor list each time because it might be in multiple cities or it's the same city, but for whatever reason, you didn't book those well in advance, and the dates now that you're trying to line up are not available at the same space. So it really, really, really makes a lot of sense to try and look for a vendor who can provide as much value as possible. And it might not be a single vendor like StartWell, but perhaps it's someone who does some of these things. So the StartWell experience particularly uh, gives our clients options for various different stage experiences. You can rent up to 3 different venues under one roof that all can accommodate up to 150 people in each room in multiple different seating formats with a fully turnkey stage that's managed by in-house technical producers. So right off the bat, you walk in with your content and your people and you can start hosting them. For content presentation format events, very easy. For evening cocktail, very easy. Whether it's getting people in the room to just be together or getting them in the room to connect to a third party that's external. Of course, we have video conferencing integrated into our system, and we have stage recording integrated into our system. So it's very easy for us to spit out media assets and also engage people in a hybrid fashion without any logistical planning or decision making. Reducing the overhead of decision making when you're planning an event will make your life a million times easier and enable you to be able to think through the reasoning for hosting, planning better content, better engagement for the people who arrive, and plan connectivity for your actual guests, which I think they'll massively appreciate. If they're met by someone who has already thought through who they are and who they need to meet, they're going to have a great experience every single time. So the single vendor approach is really about mitigating the risks of having to make decisions by trying not to go out and procure 10 different vendors and spend 2 weeks planning for a single event. There's no point in that. And some people that we've come across are used to doing this in companies where they're spending the bulk of their evenings, because it's not their main job, just doing procurement for a series of events that are very difficult to put together because those logistics just waste your time. So if you can't find a StartWell, find multiple versions of it. Find a venue that has integrated AV, or find a catering partner that can do bar, or find an AV company that can do media recording and post-production all in-house. If you chunk out the responsibilities of your event and combine them and then rely on that vendor, which is the next point, you'll be able to create multiple events and create serialized event programming, which ultimately will connect you to your audience of stakeholders a lot better than a single tentpole event once a year. So let's talk about when to host what. Corporate events come in all sorts of different styles. And I'm using that word event, right, to connote a kind of an experience. But the thing is, whether you will talk about it internally as a meeting or as an event, they're pretty much the same thing. Ultimately, the way we look at it here at StartWell is that when you're gathering people for a corporate function, the gathering itself should be an event. It should be a cause for celebration. We're used to, of course, conventionally saying, well, corporate events are boring and personal events are exciting, right? You want to go to the park and hear a band perform in the summertime, and that's an event. or go to a friend's birthday party, and that's an event because there's cake and people and they're having fun. But a corporate event means keep your head down and don't talk too much. Well, I think that old world of corporate events should be just thrown out. It's not relevant anymore, and at least not for agile companies that want to do cool stuff and engage their staff and other stakeholders in their brand. If your brand is something that can be owned by all of the staff at a team or a company, and you can all speak on behalf of your company and you feel empowered to, then you should celebrate that. And that's kind of what a corporate event is in the year 2026, a celebration of brand, which means you want to truly use events to engage your stakeholders, engage your vendors, engage your partners of any kind, your staff, and get them all on the same page so that you can use the event to communicate essential information and open them up to ongoing communication in between your events and outside of your events. So, what are the different common formats? If you watching this are here with me to learn about corporate events because you've just been told to put one together, or it's something you're thinking about doing as a responsibility at your company, here are the common types that we see at StartWell very often. Okay, you've got executive retreats. That's basically where an executive team or a leadership team would want to take some time away from the office to really focus in a context that's compelling, comfortable, and offers them a unique experience outside of the office, but maybe within the same city. So here in Toronto, we have corporate executive retreats from energy companies, banks, insurance companies, media companies, all different industries will send their executives to StartWell for a comfy environment that's close by to the main office that might be down the road in the financial district, and that also executives can go home to afterwards or otherwise to, maybe some sort of evening event or dinner before going home. So the idea is convenience, stay in the town, stay in the city, and then, a small group. Now, other types of events could be sales kickoffs, where the sales team that sits under a RevOps organization is looking to align its people in sales scrum seasons, which is typically going to be either in H1 or H2, so the first half or the second half of the year, or quarterly. Often cases, very high-performing teams will want to align on a quarterly basis, if not more often, especially if they're remote. If they're in the same office, they might do this sort of stuff in the office. But what we find is teams really enjoy getting together on a regular basis, and sales kickoffs say, okay, here's the projection of the next few months. Here's what we need to work on in order to win our market growth that we're trying to achieve. And these are some tools that we can give you salespeople, and this is how we're going to change the organization. These sorts of aspects get discussed in a sales kickoff. That's typically seasonal for salespeople. All hands sessions. Now, all hands can be all sorts of things, but the idea is that you get everybody in a whole company or a whole team together. Now, at StartWell, because we are a comfy environment that offers a lot of variability in terms of combining large stage-focused rooms with breakout rooms on our lower level and studios to record content, we become this destination where teams will fly in from all over the place to convene in Toronto to do an all hands in person. And if a bunch of people can't make it, let's say they live in Europe or they live in Africa or Asia, and flying is too arduous and difficult and expensive, of course, leveraging our media production capability enables remote guests to be dialed in. So we can always bring people on stage. We can always have screens in the room that represent people that are, or present people that are remote, and hybridize any event that really enables all hands sessions to be interactive and engage the full team no matter where they live physically. At the same time, we also accommodate all hands that happen elsewhere. So you might host an all hands in Norway, but have some Canadians that can't fly over. Well, get them together from across Canada into a room at StartWell, and now they can connect with the Norwegians and the other Europeans who meet in Norway together, and you can create this cluster-based all hands with various locations all over the world. But otherwise, if you do have, let's say, 100, 150 people in Toronto and you want to bring them together in person, that variability of planning space to accommodate the full team to break out into sub teams at various points in your agenda. Very crucial. So something to look for when you're venue hunting if it's not at StartWell. Other things that people do plan regularly are just, team sessions. So those could be quarterly, monthly, weekly. And it's good if you're a remote team to consider keeping those sessions even as a standing weekly drop-in session. So we have some clients that might allocate a meeting room to their usage every Wednesday, let's say. And then, staff members who are in the region or in the city can just drop in and work and meet together in an ad hoc basis. That happens quite frequently. But whatever the frequency is and whatever the team size is, I think the idea of a recurring meeting that could be open to any staff is a really flexible way to engage staff in being together and give them the opportunity to create their own agenda. You don't need to plan every event. If you give people the ability to plan the event for themselves, that's, of course, subject to the culture at your own company. We've talked about a variety of internal formats for corporate events, and now let's talk about what external corporate events look like. Now, there's a number of different reasons for why a company would want to bring either stakeholders or customers or the general public into a venue to interface with them. And that's up to you to figure out, of course, in your own organization. But common formats could be education-based, where you're teaching something to the audience. Another format could be a workshop where you're actually bringing people into a practical exploration of topic matter, and you're breaking out into groups at different tables or different rooms. Or you're doing something like a micro conference, where again, you could use multiple different spaces to disseminate knowledge in different programming tracks. That could be concurrent or it could be linear. It depends on the agenda structure that you want to go after. But the idea is bring people in to learn a bunch, to meet each other. And that brings me to my last format, which is when you do a social. So essentially some format, I guess a lot of tech companies will call these meetups, where you're bringing like-minded audiences into a room to mingle and to meet each other. And you're acting as the kind of social glue for that community. And that's really good for brand equity, to act as an ambassador for the community. It's a community development kind of function. And these work really, really well, where you are always top of mind and you kind of really use the event format to propel word of mouth marketing by acting as this sort of social glue. So now that we've talked about some internal kind of event formats, some external event formats, let's look at venue selection and room layout. There's a number of different formats that we offer here at StartWell and that you should keep in mind as standard formats for all sorts of different types of corporate events. Starting things off, let's talk about the empty room. So the empty room is kind of what you might call a cocktail. Cocktail setup would, for us, be a primarily empty room where you might have some lounge furniture. We typically recommend to keep soft furnishings in the room, so for people to relax. A registration table, if it's formal and you're ticking people off the list. High tops spread throughout the room with some stools for perches. So what you would typically do would be bar service with some snacks, either at a buffet table on the side or past orders with servers if your catering partner brings staff. And you mix drinks and snacks and a little bit of content, but you don't have people sitting in chairs or at tables because you want them on their toes. It's just for a couple of hours. Typically, this is an up to 4-hour engagement. 2 to 4 hours is what people typically organize for. And the idea is to really kind of let people come together to meet each other. And a great tip for this kind of format is to try and load your list of people in the room so that your team can think through who they are and who they would benefit from meeting. And if you do this curated networking model where you're introducing people at the event to each other, they're always going to go home with value. It's an easy, cost-effective way to really get buy-in from your community or your audience at an event. Now, we fill the room up a little bit more and we talk about presentations. So the most popular format for a presentation-based or thought leadership-based event would be people facing the stage all in one direction and they're sitting in rows of chairs. This is often called theater style or row style because people don't have tables, they're not bringing their laptops. You can even send out an instruction when planning the event so that people don't bring extra bags and stuff, and they come asset light, which is easier in summer. And start the event quickly, and people are in the audience looking forward at the stage to learn or to listen. The next way that we lay out rooms would be with seminar tables or classroom style. So you're taking those rows, but you're putting very skinny kind of desks in between each row of chair. So everyone sitting can open a laptop, and that's about it. You don't want to put too much table space, available, because one, you got to factor density of space in the room, but two, you also don't want people laying out food from the breaks and drinks and then getting the whole room kind of messy and things spill, and it becomes kind of gross when you're taking photos of the event as well. So keeping table space light, clean, and minimal will enable people's efficiency in doing what you want them to do at an event. And when you're doing classroom style, typically it's going to be people working on their laptops, possibly engaging with the presentation material live and direct. So if you're a software company like Asana, who comes here and trains people for their productivity software, they'll have people watching a demonstration, trying things out in the software, and then they'll have demonstration assistants coming around to all of the tables to really do practical kind of recommendations on how to improve workflows. So that's something that can be done with classroom style. Now, if we talk about a kind of introducing bigger tables, typically we call this banquet style, where we've got tables that are separate from each other, but with chairs all the way around. In a hotel, you would have a huge banquet hall and maybe use 10-person round tables, but they're not very space efficient. So we recommend, especially in rectangular rooms like at StartWell, using 6-foot rectangular tables, and you're getting kind of nice depth of the table with plenty of room for people to either eat at the table, break out their laptops, but also have other stuff there. So for workshops where you're collaborating on big flip charts on the table and stuff like that, maybe Lego, doing practical exercises, you'd want a bigger table. So banquet style would give you a bunch of tables in the room with chairs all the way around, or chairs on 2 sides or 3 sides facing the stage. It's up to you. But that's banquet style. And then lastly, we do conference style. So another layout to consider for your session, especially if it's I mentioned for the internal functions, thinking about corporate executive retreats, typically you'll want your audience, or your guests, I should say, who are sitting at the tables, to be able to interact with each other in a very intimate way, but also maybe content. So there's 2 types of table setup typically for this, which is either a conference U, so it's shaped like this. How do I demonstrate this? Shaped like that. Or it's a conference O. Okay. So the difference is that a U would be open on one end, which is the presentation side. You're at the stage. That's the open end, so that the presenters can walk down the middle of the table. They could talk to people sitting at the table. They can mark up paper if people are doing notes, and then walk back. So it's a very kind of informal but connected experience. And then O would be where you don't really have presentations. You don't have people on stage necessarily, but what you do have is everyone around the table talking to each other. So it's a big conference setup. So as if you're in a boardroom, but you're using a much larger room so that you can afford people the table space and also the breathing room of sitting at the soft furnishings like couches in the corner, and maybe some high tops for mealtime in the middle of the day. So those are different formats of layout for thinking about your venue selection. And you want to really think about what's possible with those formats based off of what the function of the event is, to be able to choose the right room at the right event venue or mix of venues for your programming. Let's talk about meals for a second. So this is really interesting. People don't think about meals enough, which inevitably leaves guests either hungry or overfed. So having an understanding of how much to order for how many people is really a tricky problem. It either comes from experience, like for example, my team here at StartWell has seen so many events happen, and we've gone through so many different vendors in bringing catering here, that we now know like how much each person would have. But my recommendation to you is to consider, what would you have if you were at a restaurant? Okay. And think about what you're going to load your plate with. given that you're probably not going to go back to get a second plate of food. So if you're ordering one main, what's on that plate? And then accommodate or calculate that out for buffet style if you're calculating what the food should be. So a little bit of salad, a protein, some veg. What we recommend at Startwell is to not have carbs in your lunch service, especially breakfast. If you're doing continental breakfast, of course, that would be carb heavy. But there's a few tips and tricks that I can recommend. So number one, if you're planning catering for a session, try and start the session a bit later because everyone's inevitably going to eat a heavy breakfast at home as per whatever their usual standard is. And if they don't eat heavy, they don't eat at all. This occasionally happens where guests will do intermittent fasting and they're not eating in the morning or they're eating very light. And whatever their routine is, they're not going to change it just because they came to your event. And if they do change it, you're impacting their day. And that's not a good look because if you start the day off with them suddenly having a change in their program, and by the end of the day, they're either going to be tired or cranky or want to leave early. So you want to smooth the transition into your event as if it's just part of their everyday life. Now, my recommendation is start the session at 10 instead of at 6:30 in the morning. If you have to start early, it'll typically be in a smaller group that's like an executive retreat. And then they're all committed, they're bought into whatever they have to meet for. And then you could figure out a meal accordingly. If it's a bigger group, like a micro conference or a conference that has 100, 200 people, including the general public coming, what you want to do is mitigate risk, which means don't try and calculate something for everybody. Let everybody deal with their breakfast at home. Come, give them some croissant and a nice yogurt and fresh fruit spread with coffee and juices to start the day. So if they're snacky, they might not have eaten enough or, they might be tempted by something sweet, which they like, let them have it. Then they start their day and they feel thankful for it. And again, always make sure there's yogurt and fruit because fruit is something that is just wonderful and people feel healthy when they eat it. So start the day like that. And then lunchtime, again, no carbs on the lunch if you can help it. So no bread rolls, try not to do pasta dish. But if you're doing proteins, you're looking at meat and non-meat options depending on who's arriving to your event. Make sure to have a non-meat option though. A tofu goes a long way for people who don't eat meat. And you never want vegetarians to be stuck eating salad for lunch alone. That won't be enough to keep their energy up for the afternoon sessions if it's an all-day session that you're planning. For dinner, you can get a little bit more creative and you can mix things up because now people are going to wind down so they can carb up if they want and give them more options for a buffet. And then what else to think about? I would say snacks is really important. Okay. So in the morning, I said fruit is good. In the afternoon, people want little nibbles. Keep the fruit all day long, keep replenishing it. Think about snacks. You could have protein bars on a table that's at the side of the room. You could also spread these out on the tables if people are doing workshops so that every table has a bowl. Typically, I'd recommend put it in some sort of storage device, a bowl on every table. That means you can always clean up easily and people don't feel like they're making a mess on their table. So anyway, snacks are really important. Protein heavy snacks are good. Fresh fruit is good. And then you can always do something sweet if you want towards the end of the day. A good selection here in Toronto, or a good thing that people do in Toronto, is order Cops donuts. Those are very rich donuts, but they're delicious and they are very small. So easy for someone to have one, feel a little naughty, and not feel too bloated afterwards. Of course, here at StartWell, we have barista service and we have coffee throughout the day. So you don't need to bring that in from outside. If you're somewhere else outside of Toronto and you're planning a session anywhere in the world and you're thinking of coffee and tea, make sure it's great. That's one recommendation I have. We use micro roastery coffee from a micro roaster called Propeller here in Toronto. We've been using them as a supplier for 8 years and they roast the same taste profile. It's phenomenal how they have consistency, but their beans are fabulous and we can use that for pour over as well as espresso. So knowing that you have a really good coffee product that people can enjoy and stay awake for and that is consistent throughout the whole day will make their first cup taste as good as their last cup. And making sure it's hot and fresh and brewed on site ideally is going to be something that really changes their energy level and their positivity level. If someone's used to 5 cups of coffee in one day, they should be able to have it. And if they don't get as much as they're used to, then they might get cranky as well. They might leave early and so on. Similarly, for non-caffeinated options, it's really good, especially in cold months, to have a bevy of teas, including caffeinated and non-caffeinated options for people. It's a special touch. And then when it comes to drinks, I think snacks is really important if you're doing a social in the evening. Typically, you don't want to go too heavy if you're not providing a dinner and people are leaving at the end of the day. Let's say you're doing an open hour, happy hour from like 5 till 7, and then people are going off to dinners. You don't want to feed them too much so that they are incented to leave. But at the same time, you want to give them something so that if they're drinking alcohol, they're not feeling too hungry. And they don't drink too much alcohol instead of food. So we recommend light stuff. So you're thinking like crudité, which is like cut up vegetables with some dips. You've got maybe a charcuterie plate, but of course that's problematic for non-pork eaters typically because you can have brechol or something like a beef, cured beef, but there's not many other options. Definitely cheese plate, crackers, that kind of thing is good. And it's communal. So that's a nice thing because then people come together to eat together, to grab things together. They feel part of the community, which means that there's opportunities for serendipity. They can talk to each other if they're doing stuff together. So always mix that with the stuff that people can just quickly grab as well, because not everyone feels comfortable sharing things. So you want to have a few things that they can share, some vegetables, some meat, some cheeses, but then also offer maybe some sliders or some pizzas that are cut up. And ideally, it's better to spend a few extra bucks on quality pizzas than it is on bad pizzas because people really remember bad pizza. We all know as parents that if you've been to a birthday party that served you a $8 pizza versus a $30 pizza, you'll remember it and you'll wonder if your kid is going to throw up or not on the $8 pizza. So something to keep in mind for snacks. Now that we've talked about a bunch of stuff, event formats, room layout and venue choice, meals, I think it's good to consider also how you break up the day. So little things to make sure that people aren't just sitting for hours and hours and hours because most people aren't used to it. And even if they're used to it at their desk, when they're sitting together, they might not feel that comfortable for the whole day. So planned breaks, really important. Planned bio breaks, really important. But they're not exclusive. So just because you're planning breaks for people to go to the washroom, you shouldn't only plan breaks for people to go to the washroom. And have facilitators or otherwise whoever's leading the team, leading the session, always instruct your guests to take the break when they do the break. So what we recommend is at least once in the morning and once in the afternoon, if it's a full day session, to have people do some stretches. Just say, stand up, stretch your arms up, do this and breathe out, and do this sort of like communal exercise that gets everyone exercising together, breathing together, stretching together. They feel good together, and you could integrate a icebreaker in that exercise so that at the start of the morning you're doing an icebreaker, which could be something as simple as turn to your left, shake the hand of the person next to you, and tell them your favorite color. Something that like is very kiddish but also very egoless. If you start the day reducing the ego, people are going to be together, feel together, and laugh more and engage with the content more. And then, when it comes to the stretches, the mid-morning, mid-afternoon stretches and breaks, I would do a stretch and stuff before you give them a bio break so that when they go off and they come back, they're feeling really relaxed and good. You could always reverse that or do breaks on either end of the bio break that are exercise-based. For that, I would say you're doing pretty well with keeping the energy up if you're keeping people, exercised and they're eating healthy through the day. But you also might want them to walk around. And a great thing to do when the weather's good is to plan lunches that are off-site. So rather than giving people a box lunch, you could give them a budget. We've seen that before with some clients, especially for external events where they gave them, here's $50 for each person. Go spend it at a restaurant. So instead of people feeling awkward about like, I got to whip out my wallet at the restaurant, or you're going to have a steak and I'm going to have something cheaper, everyone has the same budget. And the challenge is to come back after lunch and report back to the whole team about where you went and what you ate. And that could be a good team building exercise. And it kind of levels the playing field a little bit if everyone has the same budget. What can help with that, of course, is creating a map of restaurant options, or just like you do at a wedding with a seating chart, have a predefined list of who's going where for lunch, and you can match up the groups. So now what you're doing is you're creating an ad hoc micro offsite that's about team building, because little teams form of people that might not know each other, and they're going to go and have a unique experience. They're eating at a restaurant, they're coming back, they have stories, something happened, they had a cheeky glass of wine, or they met someone they knew at the restaurant, and all of that. So that adds a little bit of fun into the day. And the same thing can be done for dinners. You can mix up dinners and then have everyone come together after dinner to meet for a nightcap, or a group activity. And group activities are great. You can also, if you're not doing a boozy social, do a group activity that's an offsite, mini golf, or a uh, escape room, or a sauna, or a tennis instruction, or whatever activity it is. You can do that at the end of the day, and the day early at like 4, group activity till 6, and then everyone goes to the hotel, refreshes, meets at a restaurant, or goes straight to the restaurant for dinner. Of course, here at StartWell, we can also plan for that on site, and we have a lot of activities that people can do, whether it's board games or it's video games and that kind of stuff, or they go away for it and come back, and the rooms get refreshed with caterers doing a seated dining setup here on site. So lots of flexibility, and you want to look for that in whatever venue you choose as well. Is that you want to be able to create experiences with the time that you rented, um, and plan for the layouts not to change. If you can not reset a room and not move furniture around, and your whole agenda is planned to use the same setup, your life will be easier, because you won't need to have the stress of, is the chair in the right place? Is the table in the right place? Etc. And of course, at Startwell, what people do is they'll hold like sessions in one room and have another room just for meals and socials. So that room's always set up for that one function. So they can keep coming in and out of it through the day. Um, yeah, I want to talk about media capture and publishing as well. It's really important to think of events as, in today's world, as evergreen experiences. So, especially for external facing stuff, I'll use the example of a B2B sales based event, which a lot of our customers will run off in cases, and I'll do a subsequent video specifically on. But we call this the honeypot event. So let's say you're doing an event where you're bringing customers into the room to socialize with potential customers. So you're using your customers as your brand advocates and your sales team. They don't know this, but you intermingle the people and you work the seating chart out, if you're doing it to that degree, so that everyone's kind of like sitting next to someone who is an advocate of your brand. They'll leave with if nothing else, they'll leave with the feeling that you're very good at what you do, and that people are singing your praises organically. The next thing you can do is bring those people on stage and intermingle them. The output of this, now coming back to the media story, is your stage recordings can be cut up into sound bites depending on how you plan your agenda on stage. And so if you plan it out in terms of a content strategy that works for your brand, you could, for example, end up with takeaways that are direct to camera because people are addressing an audience. If you have one person at a time on stage, let's say, coming up to tell you what they think is happening in Q3 of the year in this particular industry, you're going to get multiple takes of that story, which you can cut with each other or release as discrete assets and tag those people on LinkedIn and have them share that content out. So thinking through how you want to use content that comes off stage is really important. And again, it comes down to relying on a venue that can do that for you. Like, if you have to think through the content strategy, but also who's going to be recording it, and then if you don't have trust that the recording is going to come out how you expect, um, it can be stressful to create a content strategy. And especially then at the end of the day, if you're holding the bag for content not turning out, and yet you've set up your publishing cycle and you've told your partners who are on stage that they're going to get these assets and the assets don't turn out, you're like, oh, can you come in and do a re-record? That's not a good look. So working with a vendor that's a single vendor solution like StartWell, where you could trust that the media output is handled. We have, production, I guess pre-production, production, and post-production in-house. Then you know that like a week after your event, you're getting all these assets sent to you to digitally download and share with your guests. And you can schedule this. So we see a lot of clients doing this where, you know, um, 1 day out, 2 days out, 1 week out, 2 weeks out, they have guests who are in the audience as well as whoever was speaking, sharing specific assets on LinkedIn. And you get this like a reinforcement idea of people who were there start adding each other on LinkedIn. Then the content starts being shared. Everyone reminds each other about the event. The people who didn't go have some FOMO about it, but they're aware of your brand. And then more assets get released, and you can build it up: images, carousels, videos. So anyway, we help clients figure that out. If you want some thoughts, we can definitely jam on it here in Toronto if you're working with us. Um, and otherwise, if you just want ideas, like reach out to me. But media is a big part of events, and especially thought leadership based ones where you have people on stage that are smart and that know what they're saying. Use that, create the content, let it lever your brand. Lastly, remember that events aren't necessarily discrete things. Ideally, with the setup that I've described, if you now understand the value of a single vendor relationship, if you can find one like StartWell, um, if you value your different room formats and you understand how you want to keep the room set up in a way that's easy to operate, and all these other things, you really have done the hard work at this point. Once you run 1 or 2 events with this mindset of trying to make it systematized, easy, and not about all the chaos of logistics, right? Instead, reduce the logistical concerns that you have and really like focus on just creating repeatable processes and using a vendor that you can always rely on. Then all you need to do is focus on content and your community. And if you focus on content and community, well, an event is just one example of being able to interface with your community. But are you developing a community using events? You always can. You can turn your stakeholders into brand advocates and activate them in a repeat function, which means create a cadence for how often you want to host events and then match it against all of your internal needs at your organization. So that requires communication, but talk to all the different business unit heads and different collaborators within your organization that could come on stage, that could provide value for whoever you're bringing into the event experience. Mix and match formats through the year of some of these internal functions, external functions, and create a whole plan. And it doesn't need to be about a year or two, right? You could plan a quarter out, you could plan 5 years out, and then work back on what's achievable each quarter and revise your plan. But I think thinking of events as something fun that you have control over and that you can also manage an output from, whether that's to do with audience development, strengthening your stakeholder relationships, turning brand advocates into retargeting customers or even net new customers. There's a lot that can be done through events, but it all hinges on your confidence and your ability to turn on an event without worrying, without stressing, and with the understanding that it can be easier. So I hope this whole conversation helped. Come back to it. Feel free to bookmark this video and send it to colleagues if it's valuable. And we're going to keep this series going with more practical deep dives into some anecdotes from client experiences at StartWell, and then also a look under the hood at how we do our AV setups, who our catering partners are, and a lot more. Stay tuned.